Imagine dominating a sport to an extent that the administrators of the sport feel the need to change the rules of the sport to make it less one sided. Such a level of dominance was on display in the mid 1950s when Pancho Gonzalez was dominating professional tennis with his serve and volley game. So, brief attempts were made to partially negate the power of Pancho Gonzalez's serve and volley game. Now, what is a serve and volley game? Modern tennis fans might not be aware of this. Maurice McLaughlin, in the early years of the 20th century, created the cannonball serve delivery and often followed his serve into the net. Although tennis greats such as Bill Tilden, Ellsworth Wines, and Don Budge were noted for their fine serves and net games, they did not play a 100% serve and volley style game. What is a serve and volley style game? Serve and volley is a style of play in tennis where the tennis player serving moves quickly towards the net after hitting a serve to attempt to hit a volley afterwards. In the serve and volley play style, the server attempts to hit a volley. A volley is a shot where the ball is struck without allowing it to bounce, as opposed to the baseline game, which is so prevalent in the world of tennis today, where the server stays back following the serve and attempts to hit a ground stroke. Ground stroke is a shot where the ball is allowed to bounce before contact is made. The serve and volley style of play has diminished in recent years with advances in racket and string technologies which allow players to generate a great amount of topspin on ground strokes and passing shots. The slowing of court surfaces and deflation of balls, promoting longer rallies for the enjoyment of spectators both at the stadium and watching on television, has also devalued the serve and volley style. The aim of the serve and volley style was to put immediate pressure on the opponent with the intent of ending points quickly. Good returns had to be made or else the server could have gained an advantage. Serve and volley was a tactic which was especially useful on fast courts and less so on slow courts like clay courts. For it to be successful, the player should have a good serve to expose an opponent's poor return or be exceptionally quick and confident in movement around the net to produce an effective returning volley. Ken Rosewall, for instance, had a weak serve but was a very successful serve and volley player for 2 decades. Goran Ivanisevic, on the other hand, had success employing the serve and volley strategy with great serves and average volleys. Jack Kramer in the late 1940s was perhaps the first great player to consistently come to the net after every serve, including his second serve. Jack Kramer wrote in his 1979 autobiography that it was Bobby Riggs, his opponent in the 1948 Pro Tennis Tour, who began the strategy. When we first started touring, he came at me on his first serve, on his second serve, and on my second serve. My second serve did not kick like Bobby's, so he could return that deep enough and follow into the net. It forced me to think attack constantly. I would rush in and try to pound his weakest point, his backhand. So the style I am famous for was not consciously planned. It was created out of the necessity of dealing with Bobby Riggs. The playing style quickly gained popularity among elites and remained dominant on certain court surfaces until the conclusion of the 20th century. Now let's go back to Pancho Gonzalez and the strategies employed by the administrators of the sport to negate the dominance he displayed with his brand of serve and volley tennis. In several important tournaments such as the United States Professional Championships, the Van Allen streamlined scoring system, better known as VAS, devised by James Van Allen, was used. What was the system? The match was scored as if it is table tennis, with 21 points per game, 5 serves per player, and no second serves. The fans preferred the traditional scoring system, however, and in any case, Gonzalez continued to win under Van Allen's streamlined scoring system. So the main purpose of the rule change, that is to introduce more competition, to reduce the one-sided nature of Pancho Gonzalez's dominance, was not achieved. So Van Allen's streamlined scoring system in tennis was relegated to the pages of history. The next attempt was by Jack Kramer. Jack Kramer by that time was no longer a champion tennis player, he was a professional tour promoter. He was no longer his dominant player. He himself, remember, used to play serve and volley style of tennis. Jack Kramer introduced a three bounce rule, in which the server could not come to the net until the ball had been in play for at least three bounces. But this rule change also did not have any effect on Pancho Gonzalez's dominance. Gonzalez won anyway, and this experiment was also dropped. Now we come to the third rule change. This was also attempted by Jack Kramer. He tried marking a secondary service line 1 yard behind the baseline so that the server was further away from the net when he served. Once again, Pancho Gonzalez was undeterred. He kept on winning and the original rules were restored. So that's the greatness of Pancho Gonzalez, that the rules of tennis were changed not once but thrice to stop his dominance, but he continued to dominate despite the changes in the rule. Other male tennis players known for their serve and volley technique include Frank Sedgman, Ken Rosewall, Lou Hode, Rod Laver, Roy Emerson, John Newcomb, John McEnroe, Stefan Edberg, Pat Cash, Boris Becker, Patrick Rafter, Pete Sampras and Tim Henman. Sampras was known for his great serve and volley game, but it did not always come to the net behind the serve on slower courts, particularly on his second serve. This was especially the case when Pete Sampras was younger. In the 21st century, few players still prefer to approach the net on their serves. For example, Nicolas Mahut, Rajiv Ram, Dustin Brown, Pierre Hugh Herbert and Maxime Cressy. This strategy, as you can understand, has become less common in both the men's and women's game. Roger Federer served and volleyed at times during his career, particularly on grass, and you can check out his match against Pete Sampras in 2001 to see a great display of serve and volley tennis. It is available on YouTube. But everybody wasn't a supporter of serve and volley even in the early days of tennis. Bill Tilden, the dominant player of the 1920s and one of the fathers of the cannonball serve, that is an extremely powerful serve, nevertheless preferred to play from the back court and liked nothing better than to face an opponent who threw powerful serves and ground strokes at him and who rushed the net. One way or another, Tilden would find a way to hit the ball past him. Bill Tilden spent a great amount of time analyzing the game of tennis. His book, Match Play and the Spin of the Ball in 1925 is still in print. In that book, Bill Tilden states that a perfect baseline player will always beat a perfect serve and volley player 6-love because his returns of service will be winning passing shots. However, he also states that of course neither player can exist. There isn't a perfect baseliner and there certainly isn't a perfect serve and volleyer. Bill Tilden used this style of play for many years. Some of the most interesting matches of all time, according to Pat Cash, have pitted great baseliners such as Bjorn Borg, Mats Wilander or Andre Agassi against great serve and volleyers such as John McEnroe, Pat Rafter or Pete Sampras. Since Tilden's time, head-to-head results on various surfaces such as those played out in the famous rivalry between Borg and McEnroe contradict his theory that great baseline players will tend to defeat great serve and volley ones. Another perspective on the serve and volley game is that it is less tiring than playing constantly from the backcourt. Jack Kramer says in his autobiography that he and Pancho Segura once tried playing 3 matches in which they allowed the ball to bounce 3 times before either could approach the net. I don't believe I could have played tennis the way Segu and I did for the 3 nights because it wore me out, running down all those ground strokes. It was much more grueling than putting a lot into a serve and following it in. He went to say that Rosewall was the backcourt player when he came into the pros, but he learned very quickly how to play the net. Eventually, for that matter, he became a master of it, as much out of physical preservation as for any other reason. I guarantee you that Kenny would not have lasted into his 40s as a world-class player if he had not learned to serve and volley. Despite the improvements in racket technology made towards the end of the 20th century, which made serve and volley a rare tool in a tennis player's skill set, players familiar with the strategy still advocate it. Roger Federer advocated up-and-coming players not to ignore the tactic strategy of coming to the net, especially on faster surfaces and as a surprise tactic. Yet other players such as Misha Zverev acknowledged the difficulty of mastering serve and volley, recalling his 36-month effort to adopt the style. He said, every point you have to be ready. You're either going to get past, you're going to miss an easy volley, or you're going to win the point.